My follow-up question is back to you, Donna. Do you, you reviewed this, worked with the planning board on the bylaw. What's your take on how strong it is, or do you anticipate?
I don't think it's quite as black and white as Mr. Turner or Attorney Reedy are saying. They're absolutely correct. The Attorney General looks at the bylaw to make sure that it isn't obviously illegal. They do consider the Dover Amendment because it's a very important part of Massachusetts state law. The Dover Amendment is essentially the amendment that says you can't unreasonably regulate education, farmland, et cetera, et cetera. And you're all familiar with it, even though you may not be familiar with it being called the Dover Amendment. And certainly the Dover Amendment is applicable to unreasonable regulation of solar. But there's case law that's very clear that some pretty strict solar bylaws have been held to be constitutional, and even though they were challenged by solar companies, the court said sorry. For instance, the example that you can't get through the 500 feet of rural residential to the backland. Well, we know that you may not be able to through rural residential, but you can through the TC district. And there's a footnote right in the zoning bylaw that says that if you're going through the TC district, the use, even if the use is prohibited in the TC, if it's allowed in the FC, you can get through. The other thing is you could always put a subdivision road in. You could put a very simple subdivision road through the RR and get to the backland. And subdivision roads are not considered a use in the same way that Mr. Turner explained a driveway to a solar facility would be. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, our bylaw is very strict. And everybody knows that. But to categorize it as something that would be struck down in court, you'd still have to apply for the permit, you'd still have to be turned down, then you'd have to appeal it. It's just not that black and white. That doesn't mean that the town doesn't want to work with AMP. It doesn't mean any of those things. But I think that we don't have to be as concerned about the bylaw or the challenges. What I would like to really have Mr. Turner, Attorney Reedy, answer is how do you get to site plan review rather than the special permit, seen as our bylaw calls for a special permit? What's the proposal there from AMP?